Ethan Caldwell never imagined that his life, built on hard work and an unrelenting drive to succeed, would be pulled into a dangerous battle for love. Growing up on a small farm in Georgia, Ethan overcame every obstacle to create CreateSpace, a groundbreaking platform empowering thousands of artists. But all his achievements couldn't prepare him for the darkness that Isabella Monroe brought into his world. Isabella, a gifted artist haunted by her past, captivated Ethan from the moment they met. Yet her talent and resilience came with a shadow: Logan Harris, her obsessive ex-boyfriend, whose threats and harassment escalated into a storm of chaos. "You think you can keep her safe forever, Caldwell?" Logan's voice hissed from outside the apartment door. Ethan's eyes burned with defiance as he stood firm. "She doesn't need you, and I won't let you near her." In the shadow of danger and long-buried secrets, Ethan and Isabella must fight not only to protect each other, but to rise above the pain of their pasts. But will their love be strong enough to prevail? Or will the ghosts of yesterday drag them into the depths? The sun was just beginning to rise over the sprawling fields of Georgia, casting a golden hue over the dewy grass. Ethan Caldwell wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished feeding the last of the cattle. His family's farm was modest but functional, nestled in a sleepy town where dreams were often as small as the population. But Ethan's dreams weren't like the others. He wanted more than the quiet routine of farm life, more than the satisfaction of an honest day's labor. He wanted to change the world. "You're going to wear yourself out before breakfast," his father, Hank Caldwell, called from the porch. His voice was gruff, but there was an undertone of affection in his words. "I'm fine, Dad," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. "Besides, someone's got to keep things moving around here." Hank chuckled as he sipped his coffee. "I reckon we've been keeping things moving for 3 generations without you chasing the cattle like a madman. Come on in before your mum fusses." Inside the house, the smell of biscuits and bacon filled the air, a comforting reminder of home. Ethan's mother, Miriam, stood by the stove, humming a hymn as she worked. Her kind eyes lit up when she saw Ethan enter. "Sit down, honey," she said, gesturing toward the table. "You've got a big appetite to keep up with all that dreaming of yours." Ethan sat, but his mind was elsewhere. His parents had always been supportive, but their idea of success was different from his. They wanted him to take over the farm, to marry a nice local girl, and to settle into the predictable rhythm of life in Georgia. But Ethan had been reading articles and watching interviews with tech entrepreneurs, people who started with nothing and built empires. He was captivated by their stories and determined to carve out his own path. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, his voice steady but hesitant, "about moving to Charleston. There's a business program there I've been looking into." His parents exchanged glances. Hank set his coffee down slowly, while Miriam's humming stopped. "Charleston?" Miriam asked, her tone a mix of surprise and concern. "That's a ways off, Ethan." "It's not forever," Ethan said quickly. "Just a chance to learn and grow. Maybe start something of my own." Hank leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You've got a good life here, son. Why go chasing something you're not sure about?" "Because I can't live my whole life wondering what might have been," Ethan replied, his voice firm now. "I've been saving up, and I've got a plan. I just need your support." The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words lingering in the air. Finally, Miriam placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "You've always been a dreamer," she said softly, "and I suppose the world needs more dreamers. Just promise you'll come home when you need to." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him. It wasn't complete approval, but it was enough. Months later, Charleston welcomed Ethan with open arms, or at least that's how it felt, as he stepped off the bus into the vibrant city. The cobblestone streets, lined with colorful row houses and bustling cafes, were a far cry from the simplicity of home. It was a city that felt alive with possibility. Ethan quickly enrolled in the business program, immersing himself in courses on entrepreneurship and innovation. He spent his nights working part-time at a coffee shop, where the customers ranged from struggling artists to corporate executives. It was a front-row seat to the diverse lives he hoped to impact someday. One evening, as Ethan was wiping down the counter, his co-worker Jamie leaned over, grinning. "You've been staring at that laptop like it owes you money. What's got you so focused?" Ethan smiled, flipping his laptop closed. "Just working on an idea." Jamie raised an eyebrow. "An idea? You mean one of those change-the-world kind of ideas?" "Maybe," Ethan said, his grin widening. "I've been thinking about creating a platform, a way for artists and freelancers to connect with clients without all the middlemen." Jamie whistled. "Sounds ambitious. Got a name for it?" "Create Space," Ethan said, the word feeling electric as it rolled off his tongue. "It's going to be big." Jamie laughed. "Well, if anyone can pull it off, it's you. Just don't forget us little people when you're rolling in cash." The joke lightened the mood, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this idea was his ticket to something extraordinary. A year later, CreateSpace was no longer just an idea. It was a fledgling startup. Ethan had recruited a small team of classmates to help him build the platform, spending countless nights coding, designing, and strategizing. They operated out of a cramped apartment, surviving on pizza and caffeine. Despite the hard work, progress was slow. Investors weren't exactly lining up to fund a young man with no track record. Ethan felt the weight of every rejection, but he refused to give up. One evening, after another long day, Ethan found himself on a rooftop overlooking the Charleston skyline. The city lights twinkled like stars, and for a moment he allowed himself to dream. "You're quiet tonight," a voice said behind him. Ethan turned to see Sam Whitaker, one of his professors and a retired entrepreneur who had taken a special interest in him. "Just thinking," Ethan replied, "about how far I've come and how far I still have to go." Sam joined him at the edge of the rooftop, hands in his pockets. "You've got grit, Ethan, but grit alone won't get you there. You need to find your story, the reason people should believe in you." Ethan nodded, absorbing the advice. "I guess I'm still figuring that out." "Well," Sam said with a smile, "when you do, the world better watch out." By the time Ethan launched CreateSpace, he had poured every ounce of himself into the project. The platform was a slow burn at first, but with each passing month it gained traction. Artists began sharing their success stories, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. Ethan's parents, once skeptical, now beamed with pride whenever they heard about his success. "That's our boy," Miriam would say to anyone who'd listen. But even as CreateSpace flourished, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had built a platform that connected people, yet he often felt disconnected himself. It wasn't until a chance encounter in a Charleston art gallery that everything began to change. A painting caught his eye, a swirling depiction of a sunset over the ocean, bursting with color and emotion. The artist's name, Isabella Monroe, was scrawled in delicate letters at the bottom. Ethan turned to see a woman with paint-stained hands and an air of quiet determination standing nearby. Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the gallery faded into the background. "That's your work?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the painting. Isabella smiled. "It is. Do you like it?" "I love it," Ethan said sincerely. "It feels alive." Isabella's smile deepened. "Thank you. That means a lot." Ethan felt a spark he couldn't ignore. Little did he know, this meeting would set into motion a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, ambition, and the cost of success. The sun cast long golden rays through the tall windows of the gallery, illuminating the vibrant hues of Isabella's paintings. Ethan stood there, captivated not just by the art but by the woman who had created it. She moved gracefully among the displays, adjusting frames and straightening nameplates, completely absorbed in her work. He lingered, unsure whether to say more or let her be. Just as he was about to leave, Isabella turned and caught his gaze again. "You're still here," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice, though her smile was warm. "I didn't scare you off with all that color, did I?" "Hardly," Ethan replied, chuckling. "I was just trying to take it all in. Your work. It's incredible." "Thank you," Isabella said softly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. There was something vulnerable in her expression, as though she wasn't entirely used to receiving such genuine praise. Ethan hesitated, then extended his hand. "I'm Ethan Caldwell." "Isabella Monroe," she replied, shaking his hand. Her grip was firm, but her paint-smeared fingers added a touch of charm. "I couldn't help but notice," Ethan began, then paused, trying to find the right words. "Your paintings feel so alive. It's like they're telling stories." Isabella's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I try to do. Every piece has a story. It's just a matter of whether people take the time to see it." "Well, I'd like to hear yours," Ethan said, his tone sincere. Isabella laughed, a light melodic sound that made Ethan's chest tighten. "It's not very exciting," she said. "Just a lot of paint, a little chaos, and a lot of hoping I can pay the rent." "Sounds pretty exciting to me," Ethan said with a grin. "Do you ever show your work outside Charleston?" Isabella hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. "Not yet. Galleries tend to prefer artists with more credentials. I've applied to a few, but no luck so far." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. He knew what it was like to face rejection and doubt, to push forward even when the odds seemed stacked against you. "Have you heard of CreateSpace?" he asked. Isabella tilted her head. "The online platform for creatives? Yeah, I've heard of it." "I started it," Ethan said, his voice steady but humble. "It's designed for artists like you, people who have talent but need a way to reach more people. You should check it out." Isabella blinked, clearly surprised. "You started CreateSpace?" "I did," Ethan confirmed, "and I'd love to help you get your work on there. I think it could open a lot of doors for you." For a moment, Isabella seemed uncertain, as though she wasn't sure whether to accept his offer. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. Thank you, Ethan." He smiled. "Good. Let me know if you need any help setting up." With that, Ethan left the gallery, his mind racing. There was something about Isabella, her passion, her resilience, that he couldn't get out of his head. He didn't know where this connection would lead, but he was eager to find out. That evening, Isabella stood in her small studio apartment, staring at her latest canvas. The vibrant blues and oranges seemed to blur together under the harsh glow of her single desk lamp. She sighed, setting her brush down and rubbing her temples. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It was Logan Harris. She hesitated before answering. "Logan," she said curtly. "Isabella." Logan's voice was smooth, almost too polished. "I saw your post about the gallery. It seems you're doing well." "Trying to," Isabella replied, her tone guarded. "Well, I'd like to help," Logan continued. "I've got connections, big galleries in New York, collectors who would pay a fortune for your work. We could make it happen. Together." Isabella's grip on the phone tightened. Logan always knew how to make his offers sound tempting, but she hadn't forgotten how controlling he had been when they were together. "I appreciate the thought," she said carefully, "but I'm doing fine on my own." "Isabella, come on," Logan said, his tone shifting to one of impatience. "You're wasting your potential in Charleston. You belong on a bigger stage. I belong where I choose to be, Isabella snapped. And right now, that's here. There was a long pause before Logan spoke again. Fine, but when you realize I'm right, don't say I didn't warn you. He hung up, leaving Isabella shaking with frustration. She set her phone down and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Logan had always known how to get under her skin, but she wasn't going to let him derail her now. The next day, Ethan returned to the gallery, this time with a purpose. He found Isabella in the same spot, adjusting her displays. Back again? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Guilty, Ethan said with a sheepish grin. I wanted to check if you'd thought about joining CreateSpace. I have, Isabella said, folding her arms, but I'm not sure it's for me. I've always done things the old-fashioned way. Paint, gallery, buyer. Adding technology to the mix feels complicated. I get that, Ethan said. But think of it this way. CreateSpace isn't replacing the gallery. It's expanding it. You'd be reaching people who might never set foot in Charleston but would fall in love with your work. Isabella studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Why does this matter so much to you? Because I believe in what you're doing, Ethan said simply, and because I know what it's like to fight for a dream. Isabella's eyes softened. For the first time, she saw past the polished businessman and glimpsed the determination that had brought him here. All right, she said finally. I'll give it a shot. Ethan's smile was brighter than the Charleston sun. You won't regret it. As they worked together to set up her CreateSpace profile, Isabella found herself opening up about her struggles, her family's vineyard, her breakup with Logan, the pressure of trying to prove herself. Ethan listened intently, offering words of encouragement and sharing his own stories of rejection and resilience. By the time they finished, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the gallery. Isabella looked at the screen, where her paintings were now displayed for the world to see. It feels surreal, she said quietly. It's just the beginning, Ethan replied. You've got something special, Isabella. People are going to notice. As she walked him to the door, Isabella felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She watched as Ethan disappeared down the cobblestone street, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. Little did she know, their paths were now entwined in ways neither of them could predict. And as the days unfolded, the challenges ahead would test not only their ambitions, but the fragile connection they had begun to build. The hum of Charleston streets at twilight felt electric, carrying with it a rhythm that seemed to match Ethan's racing thoughts. He paced along the cobblestones outside a small cafe, replaying the day in his mind. Isabella had finally agreed to try CreateSpace, a step forward not just for her art, but for something he couldn't quite name, something deeper, something that made his pulse quicken every time her name crossed his mind. Inside the cafe, a familiar face waved him over. Sam Whitaker, his old mentor, sat at a corner table nursing a cup of tea, his greying beard catching the soft glow of the overhead lights. "Ethan," Sam called out warmly, "you're looking like a man with something to say. Come sit." Ethan slid into the seat across from him, offering a small smile. "It's been a long day." "Long days mean you're doing something right," Sam replied, his eyes twinkling. "Spit it out." "What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated, tapping his fingers against the table. "I met someone." Sam raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "Ah, now we're getting somewhere. Who is she?" "She's different," Ethan said slowly, searching for the right words. "Her name's Isabella. She's a painter, incredibly talented but struggling to get noticed. I helped her set up on CreateSpace. And?" Sam prompted, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "And I can't stop thinking about her," Ethan admitted. "There's this spark, but I don't know if it's the right time. Between the platform, investors, and everything else, my life is chaos right now. Sam sipped his tea thoughtfully. Chaos or not, connections like this don't come along often. If she's worth your time, you'll make it work. Ethan nodded, but the knot in his chest didn't loosen. Was he ready for this? Or was he just complicating things further? The next few days were a whirlwind. CreateSpace had partnered with a regional art fair to showcase local talent, and Ethan invited Isabella to participate. When she arrived at the venue, her wide eyes took in the bustling crowds, the vibrant booths, and the energy that buzzed through the air. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, clutching a portfolio of her work. "It's so overwhelming." "You'll be great," Ethan said reassuringly, his hand brushing hers for a moment before he pulled back. "Just focus on your art. The rest will follow." Isabella glanced at him, her nerves softening under his steady gaze. "Thanks, Ethan, for everything." The fair kicked off with a surge of attendees, and Isabella's booth quickly became a standout. Her paintings drew in crowds, their vivid colors and emotional depth captivating visitors. Ethan watched from a distance, a mix of pride and something deeper stirring within him. As the afternoon wore on, a sleek figure emerged from the crowd, Logan Harris. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his presence commanding attention as he made his way to Isabella's booth. "Well, well," Logan drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. "Isabella Munro, stealing the show as always." Isabella stiffened, her smile faltering. "Logan, what are you doing here?" "I came to see the fair," Logan said smoothly, though his gaze lingered on her in a way that made her stomach churn. "And imagine my surprise when I see you shining brighter than ever. You've always had that spark." "I'm busy, Logan," she said, her tone sharp but her hands trembling slightly. "Go admire someone else's work." Logan ignored her words, leaning closer. "Come on, Isabella. Don't be like this. We had something special once. I still think we could—" "Is there a problem here?" Ethan's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Logan with a calm intensity that sent an unspoken warning. Logan turned, his smirk fading. "And you are?" "Ethan Caldwell," Ethan said, his tone steady. "A friend of Isabella's." Logan raised an eyebrow, taking in Ethan's confident stance. "Friend, huh? Interesting." Isabella stepped between them, her voice firm. "Logan, leave. Now." For a moment, Logan seemed like he might argue, but then he shrugged, flashing a hollow smile. "Fine, but don't think this is over." As he walked away, Isabella let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. Ethan placed a hand on her arm, his touch grounding her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her eyes were glossy with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, he just knows how to push my buttons." "You don't owe me an explanation," Ethan said gently. "But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Isabella managed a small smile, grateful for his understanding. "Thanks, Ethan. That means a lot." Later that evening, as the fair wound down, Isabella found Ethan by the main stage. He was talking to one of the event organizers, his face lighting up as he spoke about CreateSpace's mission. She couldn't help but admire him, not just for what he'd built, but for the kindness and strength he showed when it mattered most. When Ethan noticed her, his expression softened. "Hey, how'd it go?" "I sold 3 paintings," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. 3. I can't even remember the last time that happened." "That's amazing," Ethan said, his grin spreading. "I told you people would notice." Isabella hesitated, then stepped closer. "I mean it, Ethan. Thank you. For believing in me when I didn't." Ethan's breath hitched for a moment as their eyes met. "It's easy to believe in you, Isabella. You just need to see what the rest of us do." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The bustling fair, the distant music, the hum of the city, all of it faded into the background as they stood there, an unspoken connection passing between them. But before either could say more, Isabella's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and groaned. "Logan," she muttered, silencing the call. "He doesn't know when to quit." Ethan's jaw tightened. "If he keeps bothering you, let me know. I'll handle it." "I can take care of myself," Isabella said, though her smile was touched with gratitude. "But it's nice to know you've got my back." "Always," Ethan said softly. That night, as Isabella lay in bed, staring at the shadows dancing on her ceiling, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. His steadiness, his kindness, the way he had stepped in when she needed it most. It all felt too good to be true. She had been hurt before, burned by promises that turned to ash. Could she trust someone like Ethan? Did she even deserve to? Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his apartment, the glow of his laptop casting shadows on his face. He tried to focus on emails and deadlines, but his mind kept drifting back to Isabella. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, strong, passionate and vulnerable in a way that made him want to protect her without smothering her. But there was Logan, and there was the storm Ethan sensed brewing just beyond the horizon. Whatever was unfolding between him and Isabella, it wasn't going to be simple. And yet he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not ever. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled Ethan's apartment as he sat at his desk, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. He should have been focused on the investor pitch he needed to finalize by morning, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he tried to concentrate, an image of Isabella standing proud at her booth, facing down Logan, flashed in his mind. With a sigh, Ethan pushed his chair back and stood, running a hand through his hair. The apartment felt too quiet, the kind of silence that made thoughts louder. He grabbed his jacket and keys. Maybe a walk in the rain would clear his head. The next day, Ethan arrived at the gallery, the bell above the door chiming softly as he entered. Isabella was at her easel near the back, a smear of vibrant orange spreading across her canvas. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, though her eyes carried a hint of exhaustion. "You've been busy," Ethan said, nodding toward the half-finished painting. "Deadlines don't care about sleep," Isabella replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to check in," Ethan said, his tone gentle. "After everything at the fair, and Logan." Isabella sighed, setting her paintbrush down. "He hasn't stopped calling. I blocked his number, but it's like he has a sixth sense for finding ways to bother me." Ethan's expression hardened. "He's crossing a line. Have you thought about filing a restraining order?" "It feels so dramatic," Isabella said, though her voice wavered. "I just want him to leave me alone." Ethan stepped closer, his concern evident. "This isn't about drama, Isabella. It's about your safety. You shouldn't have to deal with this on your own." She looked up at him, her resolve faltering under the weight of his words. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "I just hate feeling like I can't handle my own problems." "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met," Ethan said, his voice firm but kind. "But even the strongest people need help sometimes. Let me help you." Isabella nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Thank you, Ethan." Later that evening, Ethan found himself sitting across from Sophia Carter at a trendy downtown bar. The clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation filled the air, but Sophia's sharp gaze was fixed squarely on him. "So, who is she?" Sophia asked, her tone light but probing. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "Come on, Ethan," Sophia said, smirking. I've known you long enough to know when you've got someone on your mind. Spill. He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Her name's Isabella. She's a painter. Talented, smart, complicated. Sounds serious, Sophia said, leaning back in her chair. What's the catch? There's this guy, Ethan admitted. An example. He won't leave her alone. Sophia's smirk faded, replaced by a more thoughtful expression. That's messy. Tell me about it, Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. But it's not just that. There's something about her, something that makes me want to be better, to do more. Sophia studied him for a moment, then sighed. Well, for what it's worth, I hope it works out. Just be careful, okay? People like us, people who spend their lives building things, we're not always good at balancing the rest. I'll keep that in mind, Ethan said, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia's words carried more weight than she let on. Meanwhile, Isabella was back at her apartment, staring at the locked door with a sense of unease. The evening had passed quietly, but the silence felt oppressive, as though Logan's presence lingered in the shadows. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away, and returned to her easel. Her phone buzzed, and she jumped, the sound slicing through the stillness. For a moment she hesitated, afraid it might be another call from Logan, but when she checked the screen, it was Ethan. Ethan, just wanted to see how you're doing. A small smile crept onto her face as she typed back. Isabella, better. Thanks for earlier. Ethan, anytime. Remember, I've got your back. Her smile widened, and for the first time that evening, the tension in her chest eased. The next morning, Ethan and Isabella met at a coffee shop near the gallery to discuss her upcoming projects. The warm aroma of roasted beans filled the air as they sat at a corner table, her portfolio spread out before them. These are incredible, Ethan said, flipping through the pages. You've got a unique voice. It's raw but polished at the same time. Isabella blushed slightly. Thanks. I've been experimenting more lately, trying to push myself. It shows, Ethan said, his tone earnest. Have you thought about doing a solo exhibition? With the momentum you've got from the fair, now might be the perfect time. Isabella's eyes widened. A solo exhibition? That's ambitious. You're ready, Ethan said firmly, and I'll help you make it happen. Her heart swelled at his confidence in her, but a flicker of doubt remained. What if no one comes? They will, Ethan said without hesitation, because your work deserves to be seen. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion near the entrance. Isabella turned, her stomach sinking as she recognized Logan standing there, his eyes scanning the room. When he spotted her, his expression lit up with something that made her blood run cold. Isabella, Logan called, striding toward their table. Ethan rose to his feet, his jaw tightening. Logan, you're not welcome here. I'm not here for you, Logan said, brushing him off. He turned to Isabella, his voice softening in a way that felt rehearsed. Can we talk, just for a minute? No, Isabella said, her voice trembling but firm. You need to leave. Please, Logan said, his tone pleading now. I just want to make things right. Ethan stepped between them, his presence a wall of protection. You've made your point, Logan. Now leave, or I'll call the police. Logan's expression darkened, his charm slipping to reveal something colder. This isn't over, he said quietly before turning and walking away. Isabella sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. Ethan sat beside her, his concern evident. Are you okay? He asked gently. She nodded, though tears threatened to spill. I hate that he still has this power over me. He doesn't, Ethan said firmly. Not anymore. You're stronger than he is, Isabella. Don't forget that. She looked at him, her gratitude mingling with something deeper. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." His hand brushed hers, and for a moment the world felt quiet again, just the two of them, standing together against whatever storm lay ahead. The autumn wind carried a crispness that teased at the edges of Charleston's historic streets, its chill hinting at winter's approach. Isabella stood outside the gallery, her arms crossed against the breeze as she stared down at her phone. She had been replaying the events at the coffee shop in her head since yesterday. Logan's arrival, his dark warning, and Ethan's steady presence beside her. She hated that Logan could still unsettle her. But more than that, she hated feeling like she was dragging Ethan into her mess. He didn't deserve this. Yet, a small part of her was grateful for him, his support, his calm reassurance, his unwavering belief in her. It was a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. Her phone buzzed in her hand, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Ethan. "Ethan, got a surprise for you. Meet me at the waterfront park at 3. A smile tugged at her lips despite the knot in her stomach. "Isabella, should I be worried?" Ethan, "Only if you hate good surprises." By the time she arrived at Waterfront Park, the afternoon sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting golden light over the iconic fountains and swaying palmetto trees. Ethan stood near the pier, his hands in his pockets, gazing out at the water. When he spotted her, his face lit up, and he waved her over. "You're late?" he teased as she approached. "I'm an artist," Isabella replied, smirking. "We operate on our own time." "Fair enough." He gestured toward the bench behind him. "Sit with me for a minute." Curiosity prickling at her, Isabella nodded and sat beside him, her gaze flickering between Ethan and the expanse of shimmering water. "What's this surprise?" she asked, tilting her head. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her, his expression unreadable. Isabella opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a printed invitation with her name at the top. Charleston Art Collective presents a solo exhibition featuring the works of Isabella Munro. Her hands trembled as she looked back up at Ethan. "Is this real?" "As real as it gets," Ethan said, his smile widening. "I reached out to the Charleston Art Collective after the fair. They loved your work and agreed to host your first solo show." Tears pricked at Isabella's eyes, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "Ethan, I can't believe you did this. How did you—" "Don't give me all the credit," he interrupted, his tone soft. "Your art did most of the work. I just made a few calls." Overwhelmed, Isabella let out a shaky laugh. "This is everything I've ever wanted. I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Ethan said simply. "Just promise me you'll show the world what you're capable of." Isabella stared at him, her chest tight with emotion. "I promise." The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Isabella threw herself into her work, pouring every ounce of energy and emotion into finishing the pieces for her exhibition. Ethan was by her side every step of the way, offering encouragement, handling logistics, and ensuring she didn't drown in the chaos. But as the exhibition drew closer, so did the storm brewing just beyond the edges of her life. The night before the exhibition's opening, Isabella was in her studio, putting the finishing touches on her final painting, a swirling masterpiece of blues and golds that captured the sea at dawn. The piece was deeply personal, inspired by her childhood memories of visiting the coast with her parents before their vineyard began to falter. She stepped back, studying the painting with a critical eye. It was perfect, and yet a wave of doubt crept over her. What if no one came? What if the critics were harsh? What if Logan— Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock at the door. She froze, her brush still in hand. Another knock followed, sharper this time. "Isabella!" Logan's voice called from the other side. "I know you're in there. Open the door." Her heart thundered in her chest. "Go away, Logan!" "We need to talk," he shouted, his tone teetering between pleading and anger. Isabella set the brush down with trembling hands and grabbed her phone. Her first instinct was to call Ethan, but she hesitated. Could she handle this on her own? "Isabella, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Logan's voice grew more impatient. Gathering her courage, Isabella walked to the door and opened it a crack, the chain still in place. Logan's face appeared, his expression a mix of desperation and frustration. "What do you want?" she demanded. "To talk," Logan said, his voice softening. "You've been avoiding me." "For good reason," Isabella snapped. "You don't know how to take no for an answer." Logan's jaw tightened. "I just want to help you. I can make your career take off in ways this little exhibition never will." Isabella's anger flared. "This little exhibition is my dream, Logan, and I don't need you to make it happen." "You're making a mistake," Logan warned, his eyes narrowing. "You'll see." "Leave," Isabella said, her voice shaking with anger, "and don't come back." For a moment Logan looked like he might argue, but then he turned and stormed off. Isabella closed the door, her hands trembling as she locked it again. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the gallery early to help Isabella set up. She looked exhausted but determined, her energy channeled into every detail of the event. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "Just last-minute nerves," Isabella lied, not wanting to burden him with the details of Logan's late-night visit. "You've got this," Ethan said, his confidence in her unwavering. "Tonight's going to be incredible." Isabella managed a small smile, but the unease in her chest lingered. By the time the exhibition opened that evening, the gallery was alive with energy. Guests mingled among the paintings, their admiration evident in the way they lingered over each piece. Isabella moved through the crowd, accepting compliments and answering questions with a grace she didn't know she possessed. Ethan watched from a distance, his chest swelling with pride. This was her moment, and she was shining brighter than ever. But the triumph of the evening was shattered when Logan appeared, slipping into the gallery unnoticed. He moved through the crowd like a shadow, his gaze fixed on Isabella. When she finally saw him, her heart sank. He approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Congratulations," Logan said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "You've really outdone yourself." Isabella stiffened. "What are you doing here?" "Just showing my support," Logan said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I have to admit, you've surprised me. I didn't think you had it in you." Before Isabella could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his presence a shield. "Logan, you need to leave." "Relax," Logan said, holding up his hands. "I'm just here to appreciate the art." "You've made your point," Ethan said firmly. "Now go." For a moment Logan hesitated, his eyes flickering between Isabella and Ethan. Then he smirked. "This isn't over," he said quietly before walking away. As the door closed behind him, Isabella let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You're safe," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let him hurt you." Isabella looked up at him, her gratitude mixing with something deeper. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He smiled, but there was a storm in his eyes, a promise that whatever Logan was planning, he wouldn't let it touch her. And for the first time that evening, Isabella felt like she could breathe. The morning sun filtered through Isabella's curtains, casting warm streaks across her bedroom walls. She sat at the edge of her bed, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. The events of the previous night still played on a loop in her mind. Logan's arrival, his cryptic words, and Ethan's unwavering defense. It had been her moment to shine, but Logan had cast a shadow over it, leaving her both proud and unsettled. A knock at her door broke her train of thought. She set the mug down and crossed the room, glancing through the peephole. Ethan stood on the other side, his expression a mix of concern and warmth. She opened the door and managed a weak smile. "Morning," he said, holding up a brown paper bag. "I brought bagels. Thought you could use some carbs after last night." Isabella chuckled softly and stepped aside to let him in. "You're a lifesaver. Come in." Ethan entered, his eyes scanning the room briefly before landing on her. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Isabella replied, though her voice lacked conviction. She motioned for him to sit and joined him at the small kitchen table. "It was a lot to process. I just wish he'd leave me alone." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Logan's not going to back off unless we make him. Have you thought about the restraining order?" Isabella sighed, resting her chin on her hand. "I know you're right. I just hate that it's come to this. It feels like he's winning, you know? Like he still has this power over my life." "He doesn't," Ethan said firmly, leaning forward. "He only has as much power as you let him. And I'm here, Isabella. You're not in this alone." His words washed over her like a balm, soothing the raw edges of her fear. She reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what I'd do without you." Ethan's gaze softened, and for a moment the tension in the room melted away, replaced by something warm and unspoken. But before either could say more, Isabella's phone buzzed on the counter, pulling them back to reality. She stood and checked the screen, her shoulders stiffening. "Who is it?" Ethan asked. "It's the gallery," Isabella said, her brow furrowing. "They want me to come in today. Something about discussing the exhibition's success." Ethan smiled. "That's a good thing. You had an incredible night, despite everything." Isabella nodded, though the weight of Logan's presence still lingered in her mind. "Yeah. I'll head over after breakfast." The gallery was quiet when Isabella arrived, the usual hum of visitors replaced by the faint sound of classical music playing over the speakers. She found Rachel, the gallery manager, in her office, poring over spreadsheets and invoices. "Isabella!" Rachel exclaimed, looking up with a broad smile. "Come in. I was just going over the numbers from last night." "Good news, I hope," Isabella said, stepping inside. "The best," Rachel said, gesturing for Isabella to sit. "Your exhibition was a huge success. We sold 8 pieces, and there's interest in several more. This is the kind of debut most artists can only dream of." Isabella's breath caught, a mix of disbelief and pride swelling in her chest. 8 pieces? That's incredible." "It's more than that," Rachel said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "You've caught the attention of some very prominent collectors. One of them reached out this morning about a potential collaboration." "Collaboration?" Isabella echoed, her excitement tempered by curiosity. "What kind of collaboration?" "They're hosting an exclusive showcase in New York next month," Rachel explained. "They want to feature your work as part of their Emerging Artists series. It's a big deal, Isabella." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Isabella's heart raced at the thought of her art reaching a larger audience, but the shadow of Logan's interference loomed large in her mind. "I'll need some time to think about it," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Of course," Rachel said with a nod. "But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." As Isabella left the gallery, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was an unknown number, but something in her gut told her who it was. She hit decline and quickened her pace, the weight of her unease growing with each step. By the time she reached her apartment, she felt like she couldn't breathe. Ethan's phone rang just as he was leaving a meeting. Seeing Isabella's name on the screen, he answered immediately. "Isabella, what's wrong?" Her voice trembled on the other end. "He called me again, from a different number. Ethan, I can't take this anymore." "Where are you?" Ethan asked, already heading toward his car. "At home," she said. "I don't know what to do." "Stay there," Ethan said firmly. "I'm on my way." When Ethan arrived, he found Isabella pacing her living room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked up as he entered, relief washing over her face. "He's not going to stop," she said, her voice breaking. "I can block him, but he'll just find another way." Ethan closed the distance between them and placed his hands on her shoulders. "We'll figure this out. You don't have to face him alone." Isabella nodded, but her tears betrayed the depth of her fear. Ethan pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as she let the emotions spill over. After a moment, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart like this." "You're allowed to," Ethan said softly. "You've been dealing with so much. It's okay to let someone help." Isabella looked up at him, her gratitude clear in her eyes. "Thank you." Ethan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we go to the police. File a report, get a restraining order. It's not just about keeping him away, it's about taking back control." Isabella nodded, the determination in her gaze returning. "You're right. Let's do it." The next day they sat in a small, sterile room at the police station, speaking with an officer who took down every detail of Isabella's account. It was emotionally draining, recounting every instance of Logan's harassment, but with Ethan by her side she felt stronger. "We'll process the restraining order as quickly as possible," the officer said as he handed Isabella a copy of the report. "In the meantime, keep a record of any further contact from him." As they left the station, Isabella let out a deep breath. "That was harder than I thought it would be." "But you did it," Ethan said, his voice full of pride. "And that's what matters." Isabella managed a small smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan met her gaze, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing moment. "You don't have to face anything alone, Isabella. Not anymore." The words lingered in the air, a promise as steady as the man who had spoken them. For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt like she could see the light breaking through the clouds. But as they walked toward the car, a figure watched from the shadows, his jaw clenched and his eyes burning with quiet fury. Logan wasn't finished, not by a long shot, and the storm he was preparing would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The sky was a deep grey, clouds swirling overhead as though nature itself had decided to mirror Isabella's turmoil. She stood at the window of her apartment, her arms wrapped around herself. It had been 3 days since she and Ethan filed the police report, and though the restraining order had been granted, the uneasy feeling in her chest hadn't subsided. A soft knock at the door broke the silence, and Isabella turned, her heart quickening. She approached cautiously, but as she opened the door, her breath hitched at the sight of Ethan standing there, his familiar warmth grounding her in an instant. "Morning," Ethan said, holding up a to-go cup of coffee. "Figured you could use this." Isabella smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. "You know me too well." Ethan stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "How are you holding up?" "Better," Isabella said, though her voice lacked conviction. She took the coffee from him and gestured toward the couch. "Sit down. Let's not pretend you didn't come here to check on me." Ethan chuckled, setting his bag on the floor and sinking into the couch. "Guilty as charged. But can you blame me?" No, Isabella admitted, sitting across from him. I'm just trying to focus on the exhibition. The gallery called again this morning. They're finalizing details for New York. That's incredible, Ethan said, his face lighting up. Have you decided if you're going? I think so, Isabella replied, though her tone was hesitant. It's a huge opportunity, and I don't want to let fear hold me back. You won't, Ethan said firmly. You're stronger than you think. Isabella looked down at her coffee, the warmth seeping into her hands. I hope you're right. The day passed uneventfully, with Isabella throwing herself into her work. The rhythmic strokes of her brush against the canvas brought her a sense of calm, if only temporarily. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her studio, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. It was an unknown number. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone, her mind racing. The logical part of her knew it could be anyone, a client, a gallery rep, but the fear that it could be Logan rooted her to the spot. Another buzz broke the silence, this time a voicemail notification. Isabella stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity before finally pressing play. Isabella? Logan's voice filled the room, low and measured, sending a shiver down her spine. You think a piece of paper will stop me? You think you can keep me away? This isn't over, not by a long shot. Isabella's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, her breathing shallow. The phone slipped from her hand, the message replaying in her head like a dark mantra. She grabbed her phone and dialed Ethan, her fingers trembling. He answered on the second ring. Isabella? Logan called, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He left a voicemail. Stay where you are, Ethan said immediately, his voice steady and commanding. I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, Ethan burst through the door, his presence a storm of protective energy. Isabella was still sitting on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. He crouched beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Let me hear it, he said softly. She handed him the phone without a word, and he played the voicemail. As Logan's voice filled the room, Ethan's jaw tightened, his anger barely contained. That's it, he said, standing abruptly. We're taking this to the police. Isabella looked up at him, her eyes wide. But what if— No, Ethan interrupted, his tone firm but kind. He's not going to scare you into silence, Isabella. Not anymore. Her throat tightened with emotion, but she nodded. Okay. The police station felt colder this time, the fluorescent lights harsh against the somber atmosphere. The officer who had taken Isabella's initial report listened to the voicemail with a grave expression before setting the phone down. This is clear evidence of a violation, he said. We'll move forward with enforcement, but I recommend you take additional precautions. Change your locks, avoid walking alone, and consider staying somewhere else for a while. Ethan's hand found Isabella's, squeezing gently. She'll stay with me. Isabella glanced at him, her surprise mingling with gratitude. Ethan, No arguments, he said firmly. You're safer with me. The officer nodded. That's a good idea. We'll do everything we can on our end, but it's always better to be cautious. Later that evening, Isabella found herself in Ethan's apartment, her belongings hastily packed into a duffel bag at her feet. The space was warm and inviting, a reflection of Ethan's personality, but she couldn't shake the tension coiled in her chest. You didn't have to do this, she said, as Ethan set her bag down in the guest room. I wanted to, Ethan replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Besides, I couldn't let you stay there alone, not after that message. Isabella nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thank you. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze steady. You don't have to thank me, Isabella. I care about you, more than I can put into words. Her breath hitched, and for a moment The weight of her fear and uncertainty lifted, replaced by the warmth of his presence. She reached up, her hand brushing against his cheek. "You're one of the only things keeping me sane right now." Ethan smiled softly, his hand covering hers. "Then let me keep doing it." The next morning, the tension between them was palpable but unspoken as they sat together over breakfast. Isabella sipped her coffee, her thoughts racing with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. She had grown so used to fighting her battles alone that letting Ethan in felt foreign, yet undeniably comforting. "What's on your mind?" Ethan asked, his voice pulling her from her thoughts. Isabella hesitated before answering. "Just everything. The exhibition, Logan, staying here. It's a lot." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get it, but you don't have to carry all of this by yourself. I'm here, Isabella, for whatever you need." His words sank into her, wrapping around her like a protective shield. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face the storm alone. But neither of them could have predicted what Logan's next move would be, or how far he was willing to go to shatter the fragile sense of peace they had begun to build. The cold night air bit at Isabella's cheeks as she and Ethan stepped out of his car and into the dimly lit parking lot of the gallery. The city was quieter than usual, with only the occasional hum of a passing car breaking the silence. Inside the gallery, preparations for her exhibition's second phase were in full swing. Despite the excitement, a shadow hung over Isabella, one that Ethan could see every time her smile faltered or her eyes darted toward the door. "You okay?" Ethan asked softly as they approached the entrance. Isabella nodded, though her grip on her bag tightened. "I'll be fine, just trying to focus on the positives." Ethan smiled, the kind that felt like sunlight cutting through clouds. "Well, if you need a distraction, I'm happy to make a fool of myself to keep you smiling." The comment drew a laugh from Isabella, light and fleeting but genuine. "I'll hold you to that." Inside the gallery, Rachel was already bustling about, directing staff and making last-minute adjustments to the displays. She spotted Isabella and rushed over, her clipboard tucked under one arm. "Isabella, you're here just in time," Rachel said, her voice breathless but cheerful. "I wanted to go over a few final details with you before tomorrow's opening." "Of course," Isabella said, glancing at Ethan. "Will you be okay waiting here?" "Take your time," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the room. "I'll wander around and pretend I know something about art." Isabella grinned, the weight on her shoulders lifting slightly as Rachel led her toward the back office. As Ethan wandered through the gallery, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and frowned at the unknown number on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Hello?" There was a pause, followed by a low chuckle that sent a chill down his spine. "Ethan Caldwell," Logan's voice drawled. "I was hoping we'd get a chance to chat." Ethan's jaw tightened. "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways," Logan replied smoothly. "But that's not important. What is important is that we have a little misunderstanding to clear up." "There's nothing to clear up," Ethan said, his voice cold. "You're harassing Isabella, and it stops now." Logan laughed again, the sound grating. "You think you can protect her, that she's safe with you? Let me tell you something, Caldwell. You're out of your depth." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened, but he kept his tone calm. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact," Logan said, his voice hardening. "You don't know her like I do. She's always been stubborn, but she'll come around. She always does." "Not this time," Ethan said firmly. "Stay away from her, or you'll regret it." "We'll see about that," Logan said, his tone dripping with malice. "Enjoy your evening, Caldwell, while you still can." The line went dead, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the gallery, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. He couldn't let Logan get into his head. Not now, when Isabella needed him most. In the back office, Rachel was laying out a schedule for the opening when Isabella's phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Another unknown number. Her stomach twisted, but she ignored it, silencing the device and turning her attention back to Rachel. "Sorry," she said, forcing a smile. "What were you saying?" "I was just asking if you're comfortable giving a short speech tomorrow," Rachel said. "Nothing too formal, just a few words about your inspiration and what this exhibition means to you." Isabella hesitated, the idea of standing in front of a crowd making her chest tighten. But she thought of Ethan's words, his unwavering belief in her, and nodded. "I can do that." Rachel beamed. "Perfect. You're going to be amazing." By the time Isabella and Ethan left the gallery, the streets were nearly empty, the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. As they walked to the car, Ethan's protective instincts kicked in, his eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of Logan. "Did something happen?" Isabella asked, noticing his tension. Ethan hesitated, debating whether to tell her about the call. "Logan called me," he admitted. "He's trying to rattle me, but I'm not letting him." Isabella stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide. "He called you? Ethan? This is escalating." "I know," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But we're not going to let him scare us. We're going to handle this together." Isabella nodded, her trust in him unshaken despite her growing fear. "Okay, together." That night, Ethan insisted on staying awake to keep watch while Isabella slept. He sat on the couch, his laptop open but forgotten as his mind replayed the call. Logan was dangerous, and the threat he posed was growing by the day. Around midnight, a noise outside caught Ethan's attention. He stood, his heart racing as he moved to the window. A dark figure stood near Isabella's car, their movements quick and deliberate. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed his phone and headed outside, his footsteps silent against the pavement. As he approached, the figure turned, their face obscured by the shadows. Ethan's voice cut through the darkness. "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" The figure bolted, disappearing into the alley before Ethan could get a good look. He turned to Isabella's car and swore under his breath. The tires had been slashed, the jagged edges of the rubber a stark reminder of Logan's escalating obsession. Ethan called the police, his hands trembling with a mix of anger and adrenaline. As he explained the situation, he glanced up at Isabella's window. The light was still off. She was safe for now. But the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a declaration of war. The next morning, Isabella woke to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She noticed the tension in his shoulders and frowned. "Ethan? What happened?" He hesitated, not wanting to add to her stress, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth. "Someone slashed your tires last night." Isabella's face paled, and she sank into the chair opposite him. "Logan?" "Probably," Ethan said, his voice hard. "The police are investigating, but we need to be extra careful from now on." Isabella's hands shook as she ran them through her hair. "This is too much, Ethan. I don't know how to fight this." "You don't have to," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "I'll fight for you, for us." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, but she nodded. "Okay, I trust you." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "We'll get through this, Isabella. Together." As their hands intertwined, the storm outside grew stronger, the wind howling against the windows. But inside, their resolve was unshakable. They would face whatever came next, side by side, no matter the cost. The wind howled outside the apartment, rattling the windows as the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Rain lashed against the glass in sheets, the sound echoing like distant whispers of warning. Isabella sat at the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stared at the coffee table, her mind racing. Across from her, Ethan leaned forward in the armchair, his elbows resting on his knees, his expression unreadable but tense. Neither of them spoke, the silence heavy with unspoken fears. Finally, Isabella broke the quiet, her voice soft but trembling. "He's not going to stop, is he?" Ethan met her gaze, his own eyes dark with concern. "Not unless we make him. The police are doing what they can, but Logan isn't going to just back down." Her hands tightened into fists, her knuckles turning white. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. Every time I hear my phone buzz or see a shadow outside, I feel like I'm going to unravel." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing to the window and looking out into the rain. His silhouette was rigid, his frustration palpable. "You shouldn't have to live like this," he said, his voice low but firm. "No one should." "Then what do we do?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking. "What else is there?" Ethan turned back to her, his jaw set. "We fight back, harder than we have been. No more waiting for him to make the next move. We take control." Her brow furrowed as she stared at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "We go public. We expose him for who he really is. People like Logan thrive on control, on keeping things in the shadows. If we drag him into the light, he loses his power." Isabella's breath hitched at the thought. The idea of sharing her story, of opening herself up to scrutiny, was terrifying. But as she looked at Ethan, she saw the determination in his eyes, the unwavering belief that they could weather this storm together. "What if no one believes me?" she whispered. "They will," Ethan said, crossing the room and kneeling in front of her. He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "Because you'll have the truth on your side, and I'll be right there with you." Isabella closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. The fear still clung to her, but beneath it, a spark of something else began to grow. Strength, resilience. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Let's do it." The next morning, the rain had subsided, leaving behind a city washed clean but still cloaked in grey skies. Isabella and Ethan sat side by side at the kitchen table, their laptops open and a stack of notes between them. They had spent the early hours drafting a statement, one that would detail Logan's harassment and the steps they had taken to protect themselves. As they worked, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It was Rachel from the gallery. "Hey, Rachel," he said, putting the call on speaker. "Is everything okay?" Rachel's voice was strained, the usual cheerfulness absent. "Not really. Someone broke into the gallery last night." Isabella froze, her hand flying to her mouth. "What?" "Don't worry, the police are already here," Rachel said quickly. "Nothing major was taken, but—" "Isabella, one of your paintings was destroyed." The air seemed to leave the room. Isabella's chest tightened, her mind racing. "Which one?" "It's the centerpiece for your exhibition," Rachel said softly. "The one of the ocean at dawn." Isabella's heart shattered. That painting had been her most personal piece, a reflection of her childhood and her family. The thought of it torn to pieces was almost too much to bear. "Do you think it was him?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp. Rachel hesitated. "I don't want to speculate, but the vandalism seemed targeted. Whoever did it left a message scrawled on the wall." "What did it say?" Isabella asked, her voice trembling. Rachel's answer was barely above a whisper. It said, "This isn't over." By the time they arrived at the gallery, the police had cordoned off the scene. The destroyed painting was a heartbreaking sight, its vibrant colors ripped apart and smeared across the floor. On the wall behind it, written in jagged, angry letters, was the message Rachel had described. Isabella stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his grip protective as he glared at the scene. "This is escalating," one of the officers said as he approached them. "We're going to increase patrols around the gallery and your apartment, but I strongly recommend you take additional precautions." Isabella nodded numbly, her voice caught in her throat. Ethan spoke for both of them. "We'll do whatever it takes." As they left the gallery, Isabella's mind raced. Logan's actions were no longer just about intimidation. They were an all-out assault on her life and her dreams. But as much as it hurt, the destruction of her painting only fueled the fire inside her. That evening, Isabella and Ethan recorded a video, one that would tell her story and expose Logan for the threat he truly was. It was raw and emotional, with Isabella speaking directly to the camera while Ethan sat by her side, his silent support a constant presence. "I've been silent for too long," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "But silence only gives people like Logan power. This ends now." When the video was posted, it spread quickly. Support poured in from friends, strangers, and even members of the art community who had admired Isabella's work. But not all the responses were positive. Trolls and skeptics appeared in the comments, questioning her motives and even defending Logan. Ethan watched her closely as she read the comments, his heart aching at the pain in her eyes. "Don't let them get to you," he said softly. "You did the right thing." "I know," Isabella said, though her voice was tinged with doubt. "But it still hurts." "Because you care," Ethan said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's what makes you stronger than him. You care, and you fight for what's right." Isabella met his gaze, her tears reflecting the light. "I'm scared, Ethan." "I know," he said, his voice a low promise. "But you're not alone. I'm here. Always." As the days passed, the tension grew. Logan remained silent, but his absence felt more ominous than his presence. It was as though he was lying in wait, preparing for his next move. Despite the police's increased efforts, Isabella and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. Late one night, as Isabella lay awake in Ethan's guest room, a noise outside caught her attention. She sat up, her heart pounding. Another noise followed, a sharp metallic scrape against the window frame. Before she could react, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression fierce. "Stay here," he whispered, holding up a hand to silence her protest. He disappeared into the hallway, and Isabella's heart raced as she heard him move toward the living room. Moments later, there was a loud crash followed by the sound of a scuffle. Isabella leapt from the bed, fear gripping her as she rushed toward the commotion. She found Ethan wrestling with a dark figure, the two of them locked in a brutal struggle. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy lamp and swung it with all her strength, the sound of it connecting with the intruder's head echoing through the room. The man collapsed to the floor, unconscious. As the adrenaline coursed through her, Isabella turned to Ethan, her chest heaving. "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, his breath ragged. "I'm fine. Are you?" Before she could answer, the sound of sirens filled the air, and relief flooded through her. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time it felt like they might have a chance to weather it. Together. The blaring sirens grew louder, cutting through the tense silence that filled Ethan's apartment. Isabella stood frozen, her grip still tight around the broken lamp in her hand. Her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths as she stared at the unconscious figure sprawled on the floor. Blood trickled from a wound on the man's temple, staining the carpet. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You did what you had to do." She turned to him, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Is it Logan?" Ethan crouched beside the man, his sharp eyes scanning the intruder's face. "No," he said after a moment, his tone grim. It's not him. The realization hit her like a cold wave. If this wasn't Logan, then who was it? And why had they broken into Ethan's apartment? Before she could voice her fears, there was a knock at the door, followed by the hurried shouts of police officers. Ethan quickly let them in, and within minutes the scene turned into a flurry of activity. Officers surrounded the unconscious man, securing him in handcuffs before lifting him onto a stretcher. Paramedics hovered nearby, checking his vitals. Isabella stood to the side, clutching her arms around herself as though to keep from unraveling. "Miss Monroe?" one of the officers said, approaching her with a notebook in hand. "Do you recognize this man?" She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Number I've never seen him before." The officer nodded, his pen moving swiftly over the page. "Do you think he could be connected to Logan Harris?" Isabella hesitated, glancing at Ethan. His expression was a mix of anger and worry, his jaw clenched tightly. I don't know," she admitted. "But it seems like too much of a coincidence." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll look into it. For now, I recommend you stay somewhere secure. We'll have patrol cars stationed in the area." "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But I want to know the moment you find out who sent him." The officer nodded, his expression grim. "We'll be in touch." After the police left, the apartment felt eerily quiet, the stillness amplifying the tension that hung in the air. Isabella sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Ethan paced back and forth. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "What if this doesn't stop? What if Logan doesn't stop?" He stopped mid-step, turning to face her. The fire in his eyes was unmistakable. "It will stop," he said firmly. "I won't let him hurt you." Her throat tightened at the conviction in his voice. "But what if—" "No," he interrupted, crossing the room and kneeling in front of her. His hands found hers, warm and steady. "You're not doing this alone, Isabella. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. We're going to end this. Together." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she nodded, her resolve strengthening in the warmth of his presence. Together. The following day, the tension was palpable, as Isabella and Ethan met with a private investigator Ethan had hired. The man, a seasoned professional named Marcus Hayes, leaned back in his chair as he flipped through a file of documents. "I've done some digging into Logan Harris," Marcus said, his gravelly voice filling the room. "He's got a history of manipulation and intimidation, particularly with women he's dated. He's smart, though, knows how to toe the line without crossing it outright." Isabella's stomach churned. "So he's done this before?" Marcus nodded. "At least 2 other women filed restraining orders against him. But he's slippery. Always manages to stay one step ahead of the law." Ethan's fists clenched on the table. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't slip away this time." Marcus gave a curt nod. "I'll keep digging. In the meantime, be careful. Logan's got resources, and he's not afraid to use them." The weight of the words settled over them like a heavy cloud. As they left the office, Ethan placed a protective hand on Isabella's back, guiding her toward the car. "We'll get through this," he said softly. "I promise." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I believe you." That evening, Isabella found herself back in Ethan's apartment, the faint glow of the city lights spilling through the windows. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone as a mix of fear and determination coursed through her. "I think I should go to New York," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan looked up from where he stood by the counter, his brows furrowing. "What?" "For the exhibition," Isabella clarified. "I think I should go. Logan's trying to control me through fear, and if I let that stop me, he wins." Ethan crossed the room and sat across from her, his gaze intense. "Are you sure? With everything that's happening, it might be safer to stay here." "I can't let him take this from me," Isabella said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "This exhibition is everything I've worked for. If I don't go, he'll have succeeded in making me small." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but if you're going, I'm going with you." Isabella's eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do," Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Because I can't protect you from here, and because I want to be there for you." Her smile widened, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you." The week leading up to their trip to New York was a whirlwind of preparation. Isabella finalized her pieces, double-checked her travel arrangements, and tried to push aside the lingering fear that Logan would strike again. Ethan remained her constant, helping with logistics and ensuring she never felt alone. The night before their flight, as they packed their bags, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Marcus, found something. Call me ASAP." Ethan's stomach tightened, and he stepped into the other room to make the call. Marcus picked up on the first ring. "What did you find?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "It's worse than we thought," Marcus said. "Logan's been hiring people to follow Isabella. The guy who broke into your apartment was one of them." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Do you know what he's planning?" "Not yet," Marcus admitted. "But whatever it is, it's big. You need to be careful, Ethan. He's not just messing around anymore." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Thanks, Marcus. Keep me updated." When he returned to the living room, Isabella looked up, concern etched on her face. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated, then sat beside her, his hand covering hers. "Marcus found out that Logan's been hiring people to follow you." Her face paled, and she drew a shaky breath. "Why? What is he trying to do?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, "but we're not going to let him win. Tomorrow, we go to New York, and we don't let him take this from you." Isabella nodded, her fear giving way to determination. "He won't, not this time." Ethan pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as the weight of the moment settled over them. The storm was far from over, but together they would face whatever came next, and this time they wouldn't back down. The bustling energy of New York City wrapped around Isabella and Ethan like a blanket of chaos as they stepped off the plane. The air was thick with excitement and tension, a stark contrast to the slower, more familiar rhythm of Charleston. Ethan carried their bags with practiced ease, his eyes scanning their surroundings with quiet vigilance. Isabella walked beside him, clutching her carry-on as she tried to steady her racing thoughts. The cab ride to their hotel was filled with the cacophony of honking horns and murmured conversations. Isabella stared out the window, her reflection superimposed on the city skyline. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though she knew it was just her nerves, or so she hoped. "You okay?" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, grounding her. She turned to him, offering a small, tired smile. "Just overwhelmed." "You've got this," he said softly, his hand finding hers. "No matter what happens, I'll be right here." Her chest tightened at the warmth in his words, and she squeezed his hand in gratitude. "Thank you." The hotel room was modest but comfortable, with a view of the bustling street below. Isabella set her suitcase on the bed and began unpacking, her movements mechanical as her mind spun in a dozen directions. Ethan stood by the window, his phone in hand as he exchanged texts with Marcus. "Marcus says Logan hasn't left Charleston," Ethan said, his tone thoughtful. "But he's keeping tabs on his network. If anything shifts, we'll know." Isabella paused, her hands gripping the edge of her suitcase. "Do you think he'll come here?" Ethan turned to her, his expression firm. If he does, we'll be ready. The words were meant to reassure her, but they only highlighted the lingering uncertainty. Isabella nodded and resumed unpacking, focusing on the task to quiet her mind. The day of the exhibition arrived in a blur of preparation. The gallery was an elegant space filled with high ceilings, soft lighting, and an air of sophistication that intimidated Isabella more than she cared to admit. Her paintings were displayed prominently, their vibrant colors and emotional depth commanding attention even before the event began. As the clock ticked closer to the opening, Isabella felt her anxiety build, a tight coil in her chest that refused to loosen. She adjusted the hem of her dress for the 100th time, her hands trembling. Ethan stepped beside her, his presence a steadying force. "You look incredible," he said, his voice warm. She glanced at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You're just saying that to make me feel better." "I mean it," he replied, his eyes holding hers. "And so will everyone else." His confidence in her was almost overwhelming, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe it. The exhibition opened to a flurry of activity, with attendees filling the space and marveling at Isabella's work. She moved through the crowd, answering questions and accepting compliments with a grace that felt foreign but empowering. Ethan watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride as he saw her come into her own. But the feeling of triumph was short-lived. Halfway through the evening, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It was Marcus. He answered quickly, stepping away from the noise. "What's up?" "Logan's on the move," Marcus said, his tone urgent. "One of my guys spotted him at the airport. He's heading to New York." Ethan's stomach dropped. "When?" "Now. He's on the next flight out." Ethan clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "Thanks for the heads up. Keep me posted." He hung up and returned to the gallery, his eyes immediately finding Isabella. She was speaking with a collector, her face animated as she described the inspiration behind one of her pieces. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether to tell her. But then he saw the faint shadow of fear that still lingered in her expression, and he knew she needed to know. When the conversation ended, Ethan approached her, his hand brushing her arm lightly. "Can we talk for a second?" She looked at him, her brow furrowing at his serious tone. "Of course." He guided her to a quieter corner of the gallery, away from the crowd. "Marcus just called. Logan's on his way here." Her face paled, and she gripped the edge of the table behind her. "Here? To New York?" Ethan nodded, his voice low but steady. "He's on a flight now. We don't know what his plan is, but we're not taking any chances. I'll stay with you the entire time." Isabella's breathing quickened, and Ethan stepped closer, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." She met his gaze, her wide eyes filled with panic. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "We've come too far to let him take this from you. We'll get through this just like we have everything else." Her breathing slowed and she nodded, her resolve hardening. "Okay, I trust you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of tension and vigilance. Ethan stayed close to Isabella, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of Logan. When the event finally wound down, they left the gallery and returned to the hotel, exhaustion and unease settling over them like a heavy fog. As they entered the room, Isabella sank onto the bed, her hands covering her face. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate feeling like I'm waiting for him to ruin everything." Ethan sat beside her, his hand finding hers. "He's not going to ruin this. He doesn't get to take anything else from you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at him. "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're not fighting him alone anymore," Ethan said, his voice low but fierce. "And I won't let him win." The intensity of his words stirred something in her, a flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder as the weight of the day finally caught up with her. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she murmured. "You'll never have to find out," he replied, his arms wrapping around her protectively. Late that night, as the city buzzed quietly outside their window, a knock at the door jolted them both awake. Ethan moved quickly, his body tense as he peered through the peephole. "It's hotel security," he said, his voice laced with confusion. He opened the door, revealing a uniformed officer with a stern expression. "Mr. Caldwell, Ms. Monroe," the man said. "We received a report of a suspicious individual asking about your room." Ethan's heart dropped. "Did you see him?" The officer shook his head. "He left before we could intervene, but we've increased security on this floor. If you notice anything unusual, call us immediately." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on the doorframe. "Thank you." As the officer left, Ethan closed the door and turned to Isabella. She stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, her fear evident. "He's here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Let him come," he said, his tone hard. "We're ready for him." But as the hours ticked by and the tension mounted, one thing became clear. Logan's arrival was only the beginning of the storm that was about to break. The New York night was eerily quiet as the hours crept toward dawn. Inside the hotel room, the tension was suffocating. Isabella sat curled in the armchair by the window, staring out at the empty street below, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and determination. Ethan was across the room, leaning against the desk with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the door as though willing it to stay closed. Neither of them had slept, their nerves stretched thin by the knock earlier. Every sound from the hallway, every distant voice or muffled footstep set their hearts racing. Finally, Isabella broke the silence, her voice barely audible. "I hate feeling this way." Ethan looked over at her, his expression softening. "I know. I hate it too." She turned to him, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Do you think he'll come?" "Yes," Ethan said honestly, though his voice was steady. "But he won't win." "How can you be so sure?" Isabella asked, her voice trembling. Ethan pushed off the desk and crossed the room, kneeling in front of her. "Because you're stronger than him, and because we've done everything we can to be ready. No matter what happens, we face it together." Her breath hitched, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," he replied, his tone firm but filled with quiet emotion. The first rays of morning light crept through the curtains, and for a brief moment the tension seemed to ease. Isabella dozed off in the armchair, her head resting on her arms. Ethan stood watch, his body tense with vigilance. A sudden knock at the door shattered the fragile peace. Ethan moved quickly, signaling Isabella to stay back as he peered through the peephole. His breath caught in his throat. Logan was standing on the other side, his sharp suit and calm demeanor a chilling contrast to the chaos he had caused. Ethan's mind raced. He stepped back, grabbing his phone and dialing hotel security. "This is Ethan Caldwell in room 504. Logan Harris is outside my door. Get up here now." He ended the call and looked at Isabella, who had risen from the chair, her face pale but resolute. "He's here," Ethan said, his voice low, "but security is on their way." Isabella nodded, her hands trembling. "What if he—" Before she could finish, Logan's voice called through the door, smooth and unsettling. "Ethan, Isabella, let's talk." Ethan's jaw tightened. "There's nothing to talk about, Logan. Leave." "I just want to clear the air," Logan said, his tone almost casual. "You've blown this whole thing out of proportion. All I've ever wanted was what's best for Isabella." "You call this what's best?" Ethan shot back, his voice sharp. Harassment? Vandalism? Sending someone to break into my apartment? There was a long pause before Logan replied, his tone dropping to something darker. You don't understand what we had. Isabella and we're meant to be. Ethan glanced at Isabella, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and anger. You don't own her, Logan, Ethan said firmly. You never did. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, and Logan turned to see two security guards approaching. His calm mask slipped for a moment, replaced by a flash of anger. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. The guards reached him, one placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You need to leave the premises, sir. Logan's gaze lingered on the door for a moment before he allowed himself to be escorted away. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and turned to Isabella. It's over, he said, though the words felt hollow. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Isabella went through the motions of preparing for the second night of her exhibition, but her mind was elsewhere. Ethan stayed by her side, his presence the only thing keeping her grounded. That evening, as guests filled the gallery once more, Isabella forced herself to smile and engage with the crowd. She knew this was her moment, her chance to prove to herself that Logan couldn't take away what she had built. Halfway through the event, she spotted Ethan talking with Marcus near the back of the room. She made her way over, her curiosity piqued. What's going on? She asked softly. Marcus hesitated, glancing at Ethan before replying. Logan's gone dark. My guys lost track of him after this morning. Isabella's heart sank. What does that mean? It means we need to stay vigilant, Ethan said, his voice steady but serious. But you're safe here. I promise. The evening ended without incident, and by the time they returned to the hotel, Isabella felt a flicker of relief. Maybe it really was over. At 3 a.m., Isabella awoke to the sound of shattering glass. Her heart leapt into her throat as she bolted upright, her eyes darting around the dark room. Ethan was already on his feet, moving toward the source of the noise. Stay here, he said sharply, grabbing the baseball bat he had stashed near the door. Ethan, she began, but he was already out of the room. She followed anyway, her fear outweighing her need to stay put. She found Ethan in the living area, his body tense as he faced Logan, who stood near the broken window, shards of glass crunching under his feet. Get out, Ethan said, his voice cold and commanding. Logan smirked, the calm mask from earlier replaced by something unhinged. I'm not leaving without her. Isabella stepped into the room, her voice shaking but defiant. Logan, this ends now. You don't control me. You never did. His eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment she saw the man she had once cared for, charming, confident, but now consumed by obsession. You don't mean that, he said, his voice softening. We belong together. No, we don't, she said firmly. What we had is over, and if you ever cared about me, you'd leave me alone. Logan's face twisted with anger, and he took a step toward her. But before he could get closer, Ethan stepped between them, the bat raised. That's enough, Ethan said, his voice steady. You're done, Logan. Logan froze, his eyes flicking between Ethan and Isabella. Then, as if realizing he had lost, he let out a bitter laugh. You think this is over? It's not. You'll see. The sound of sirens filled the air, and Logan's smirk faltered. Moments later, police officers burst into the room, their voices commanding as they cuffed Logan and led him away. As the door closed behind them, Isabella let out a shaky breath and collapsed onto the couch. Ethan was beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms. It's over, he whispered, his voice filled with relief and exhaustion. This time, it's really over. Isabella clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt. Thank you, she whispered. for everything. Ethan pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his eyes filled with unwavering determination. You don't have to thank me. I'd do it all over again for you. For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt the weight lift from her chest. The storm had passed, and though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. Together, they would rebuild. Together, they would heal. And together they would move forward into the light of a new beginning.